Welcome to Allegory Story. My name is Tegan Aline.
My name is Melanie Nevis.
And today, we didn't know who was going to start this opening because nobody's really leading this one today. Today we're talking about the holiday of Epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite an interesting one because it's actually like a Christian holiday, but it's not, I don't know, like it's not widely celebrated in North America, at least not to my recollection in the time that I lived and grew up there.
No, definitely not. I mean, I always kind of saw it on a calendar. I didn't really know what it was. Like my family was very much Christmas, Easter.
Yeah, what we call a CE Catholic, which is ultimately what I was as well. Like you show up on Christmas and you show up on Easter. There was a time where my mom was really, really devout for a few years and we went to every single mass, but I also don't really remember going to mass for this. I think it's really interesting because technically it's supposed to happen on January 6th. So I think a lot of our minds, like once Christmas hits, there's Christmas, there's Boxing Day, which absolutely has nothing to do with anything religious. No. And then that's it. And then you're getting ready for New Year's. And then you're in the new year and like, you know, there's no more religious celebration. But actually, for some people, there is still a lot.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I feel like, for sure in North America, I don't think it's really popular. Did you do anything with this in Catholic school?
No, I mean, I don't remember. Maybe we went to mass for it, but I genuinely don't remember doing anything for it. I don't even know if we were back from holiday. I don't think so, because I think it all fell right on like in the time that you're just getting back from the holidays.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe. So
I don't know. My mom used to teach Sunday school back in Portugal when she was way like a lot younger, and I don't ever remember us talking about this. You know, we do things also like Palm Sunday and whatever in Lent and that sort of thing.
Remember all that stuff, yeah.
Epiphany?
It's always the things leading up. There's never anything so much after, except like I guess during Easter when there's the resurrection stuff. But even then, it's not really like only the real hardcores follow up with that. So with Epiphany, though, I think it's interesting. I was attracted to it originally because of three wise men in the story. I've always been fascinated, like, who are these people, like, just coming from nowhere? So this was the whole reason I wanted to kind of like look into it a bit more, because I wanted to like refresh my memory and kind of just figure out who these guys were, you know?
So you just said three wise men, and like in my head when you said that, I had three blind mice like in my head.
Yeah.
So three wise men.
See,
and I can make a little ditty.
See?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, it's normally celebrated on January 6th, but January 6th date is, here we go again. Can you guess? It's the Julian calendar date. So here's the thing. Most of us in the West, we follow the Gregorian calendar, which would put the celebration actually on January 19th. It's even later into January. Mm-hmm. But as I was doing some reading, I realized, well, this is predominantly celebrated in the Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and they still follow the Julian calendar. So it's on the 6th for them.
Well, yeah. So, Russian Orthodox have the nativity on the 7th, actually, like, and then the baptism of the Lord is 12 days later on the 19th, because they follow the original Julian calendar. Like, so it's all like,
okay.
Yeah,
because I've known people here that are originally from the eastern part of the world in Orthodox religions, but now they're living in the West, and they'll still follow the dates for them, but here, even though like the calendars are kind of... Anyways, all that to say, it's at a different time for everybody, but usually it's like 6th or 19th, some one of those 2 days, depending on what calendar you're following, I guess. And it's also got a few names, right? So I was reading that in the Orthodox Church it's called Theophany.
Yeah.
I'm saying that right. I'm probably not saying that right.
Theophany?
Theophany. Yeah,
I don't know.
That sounds better. It sounds more right than what I... It sounds more right. In France, it's called King's Day, not even Three
Mm-hmm.
Kings Day, not Wise Men's Day, but it's Three Kings Day, or sorry, it's King's Day, and that's because the three wise men are also called the three kings or the three magi.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the rabbit hole I really went down, so we'll
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit more later. But and you know, it is celebrated here quite a lot, and I think it is celebrated here on January 6th. It's a big enough,
Mm-hmm.
or it's the weekend depending on where January 6th falls. So if it's
Yeah, yeah.
kind of
I
like
read about
Halloween.
that as well. It'll fall on the weekend so it could be celebrated, right?
Yeah. So I
Mm-hmm.
like the day may not, they might not actually celebrate it on the day, but they'll celebrate it on the weekend. Like I know that we've had a few years happen where like Michael's aunt will call and be like, "Are you coming over for King's Day?" And it's like a tradition you have to go. And it's really all about, to be honest, it's about eating cake. I've been eating King's
Yeah,
cake since
but
I moved to France. I didn't know what it was about. Now I
don't we
know.
have, I mean, like, isn't every Christian holiday, it kind of comes back to food as your means of celebration? Like any holiday, any celebration throughout time, you kind of get united through food and then celebrate through that,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. But I think after a while, you kind of like lose track of what
Yeah.
the whole thing is about, you know, which I get.
It's so
It's a
interesting
almost like a
too.
natural progression in a way.
In Portugal, we have like bolre, which is king's cake,
Hmm.
and it's a traditional Christmas cake. But I wonder if it was it's originally also celebrated on January 6th, and I never put the two together because my mom always makes it and we just eat it for Christmas. But traditionally, it's
Mm.
mostly eaten on January 6th. It's mostly eaten on Epiphany. So that's like the only relation that I have to Epiphany, but I never actually made that relation until just now.
Did you just have an epiphany about
I
Epiphany?
did. I did.
Oh, that's so cool. Hopefully, there'll be many more of those as we go on. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, yeah, I know. That's one of those things. I feel like, in a way, there's a little, like, at least I'm speaking on behalf of like us from the West. I can't speak to people that grew up with Eastern traditions or grew up in the East because, like, it seems like it still has a lot of a deeper connection and meaning for them still. But for us, I feel like
Mhm.
we're quite disconnected from the actual holiday itself. And like
Yeah.
also in the East, I've also heard that it can be called Little Christmas or like Jesus.
Yep.
It's Jesus's baptism because that's like a whole other aspect of it as well. It seems like in the East, it's predominantly focused around his baptism, whereas in the West, it is kind of focused around the Magi themselves and that event. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. It really focuses on the Magi. In the East, it's celebrating, like you said, God at the baptism of Jesus. So that's the primary difference, but it kind of encompasses all of it at this point. It's kind of gotten very muddled, I want to say, in the West especially.
Yeah,
Um,
c'est la vie.
but traditionally, I guess the word epiphany was used in Greek religion to
Mm.
indicate the appearance or manifestation of a god or a goddess in human form, along
Mm.
with the suggestion that the person who had this epiphany would be delivered from danger or have their enemies defeated.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
theophany is basically a word that's used a little less frequently, unless you're in the
Theophany.
East, to
It's
mean
definitely the right way to say it.
the same thing.
Yeah. What did I say? Theophany? Oh my god, it's so bad. I shouldn't be left around words like guys. I don't know how to
But here's the thing, if you don't hear things, you're not necessarily going to know. Like, so I'm sure,
I
there are
never
people
did
that
hear
say
them.
chameleon if they never hear chameleon.
Chameleon. Oh my god, that just takes me right to How I Met Your Mother.
Exactly.
Down that rabbit hole. I feel like I could digress into that like way too much. Remind me after this, I was showing Michael yesterday the clip where they're talking about what different alcohols do to them. But anyways, oh my god,
Yeah.
so funny. Um, but yeah, so okay, so for me, what I was really interested in about this is the magi. Like I said earlier, I've
Mm-hmm.
always wanted to know who these guys were. Like I felt even as a kid growing up, I had a reflection actually while doing this that when I was growing up, I was in many a nativity story because I liked theater and I went to Catholic school, so
Yeah. Okay.
those things kind of overlap, and it kind of made me chuckle because I realized if I was ever in one of these nativity stories, I was either always playing the magi or the narrator. Of the
Interesting. I
story.
was going to ask, who did you play? So you played one of the Magi.
Yeah, I mean, like
Oh, that's cool.
I don't remember much about it. Like it's not like I really
Hmm.
had gold or frankincense or myrrh in there, which would have been cool. But like when you're a kid, you just like bring a thing and you're like, here, fake baby Jesus, and like that's it. But yeah, I did, and I think I always kind of wanted to because I was always really interested in the characters, right? So I
Yeah.
guess I guess maybe before we start, it might be interesting just to go over it because we're talking about Epiphany itself, but Epiphany is kind of connected to and blends into another topic we had thought about doing a podcast on, which was the nativity story.
Hmm.
So maybe we can just like briefly kind of go over the nativity story to just refresh everybody's memory. Like very briefly, I didn't necessarily research it. I went to Catholic school for like a really long time, so I'm just going off the cuff of memory here.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of
Chloe?
people, even if they aren't Christian at this point, kind of have an idea. Mary and Joseph live in Nazareth like 2,000 years ago. Mary's visited by an angel that tells her, guess what? You're
You're
pregnant,
pregnant.
even though they never had sex. Um, and
It's just the story at
they're
the
going
beginning.
to deliver a baby that would be named Jesus, and that would be God's son, right? That's basically a Cole's Notes version of
There's
like,
also this whole thing that she has to, because she's pregnant, she has to go and like register in where she's from or something like this. There's
mm,
like some military, there's something happening where she's supposed to go and register herself. So they get on a like a donkey and they go
mm-hmm,
to register. And I think it's Bethlehem.
mm-hmm,
I think she has to go to Bethlehem from Nazareth, right? So she gets
yeah,
there and then like she's feeling like the time is coming and there's literally no place for Mary and Joseph to go, and
mm-hmm,
so finally they just find this farm and this inn, an inn. And the guy at the inn is like, I have no rooms left in the inn because everybody is being brought, having to travel at this point in time. And he
mm-hmm.
says, but I have you can sleep in the stable, which I mean, I think to us sounds kind of weird, but I think back then it would have been like
Very common.
probably fine,
You,
like not uncommon,
yeah,
not
you
great for a
stay.
pregnant woman, but
They
yeah,
didn't know that at the time.
yeah,
They
yeah.
didn't have, I mean, maybe they did know that, but at the same time, what are you going to do? A lot of people would sleep with their animals.
So the way that we learn the nativity story, at least the way I learned it in Catholic school, is that Mary and Joseph end up going into the stable, and effectively this is where Mary has Jesus, and he's born in a manger, and they are surrounded by originally like animals
Mm-hmm.
and stable hand, like farm people on the farm that are like helping, like the servants on the farm that like help look after the animals and stuff. And as we learn it as kids, then people start to come. There's that whole story about the little drummer boy that plays like a song for Jesus. There's this whole
Mm-hmm.
thing about the magi, and that's also the kind of interesting twist on it, is like he's in a, the scene is pretty um earthly and grounded, right? Like it's in a manger, there's
Yeah.
animals around, there's common people around, and then all of a sudden these kings or these wise men come with these really, for the time, quite decadent gifts. Even now gold is a pretty
Even
decadent gift.
now,
you know
Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, like
Pretty
frankincense
luxurious
and
stuff.
myrrh. are so expensive and the resins are so expensive because it's actually so incredibly difficult to harvest them even now.
Mm,
So to harvest them, you have to basically shave the bark off of a tree, but
mm,
just a little bit. You can't do it that much because you can very easily kill the tree if you don't shave it off in the correct way. And then
interesting.
the resin kind of comes out, it oozes and it hardens. And then they
Mm,
have to go back through and collect that resin. So it's like, it takes a really long time. It's painstaking labor. You can't cut the tree in too many spots at any given time because you can kill it. So
mm,
it's difficult, and they take a really long time to grow before
mm.
you can actually harvest resin from them.
See, I didn't
So
know
like,
that. That's very interesting.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow. So, okay, even goes to show the level of work behind each one of those gifts is quite interesting.
mm-hmm.
I think maybe that's what always intrigued me about it is it's thing I've always been interested in the things I don't know. So, I didn't know about any of that stuff growing up or even now actually. So, um but I've always wondered like who are these guys? Who are the I learned of them as the three wise men growing up and then the three kings later. And it wasn't until even later that I understood them as the three magi. And just the word in itself, kind of, you're like, what? It's really closely related to the word magic. There's a big history behind that. But, essentially, they're distinguished visitors from the East. And
Mm-hmm.
in Byzantine art, so okay, a little back to the Roman Empire. So this is the Eastern Roman Empire. So this is after the empire kind of splits. We haven't gotten into that, but apparently that happens. So let's say 330 AD and onwards. So in Byzantine art, the Magi's are often depicted wearing Persian style clothes, um,
Mm-hmm.
like the clothes of Persian priests,
Yeah.
giving that distinct sense that these are people coming from the eastern sides. And in the Gospel of Matthew, where this story happens, there's actually no number mentioned. Like we say the three wise men or three kings, but actually it's not noted how many kings or wise men there were in the Bible anyway.
Well, and there's different nativity stories in the Bible. So like Matthew has one, but I know Luke also has one. Is it not mentioned in there either?
From what I read, it's not.
Interesting.
It's
So
not.
this is just one of those verbal lores that kind of get handed down because yeah, I think I remember reading about that the three learned men, the magi, are three men who studied the skies and they're from Persia, like that
Mm-hmm.
area.
Mm-hmm.
And they journey because there's some sort of celestial event that's scheduled to take place to herald the birth of a powerful new king. And then they
Mm-hmm.
collect the gifts along the way. But
Mm-hmm.
they're supposed to be Persian. But yeah, that might not be written in the Bible. That's just
Oh,
like lore
it's
that's.
not necessary to say that it's not said if they're Persian or not, but it's just not said how many of them there was supposed to
Oh,
be.
gotcha.
So like we default to three, and I think that it kind of makes sense when you look at Christianity. It loves the number three. We all love the number three. It's usually like a Trinity number, right? So maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's why. But in some like Eastern churches, like especially like Syrian churches, there's actually 12 magi in the story. So it just kind of
That's so
depends.
interesting
Yeah.
because like we also like in certain traditions we also have the names of the magi and like
Hmm.
sometimes the names are Melchior, Balthasar, and Gaspar, and
I think
then
that's
there's
kind of
Caspar. Those are like the three, but so it's like CMB are the initials, Caspar, Melchior, Balthasar. But church officials actually say that that stands for Christus Mansionem Benedicat, which means may Christ bless this home in Latin.
okay. So yes, this is connected to honestly like an English tradition, chalking of the doors, which is a tradition that they actually do,
Yes.
which is a thing that they
Yeah, yeah,
actually
yeah.
take part in I think predominantly, what was it? I actually wrote it down. Anglican, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, and sometimes Roman Catholic people participate in this chalking of the doors, where they'll in the new year, they'll write like a number, C plus M plus B plus another number. And it's usually the two numbers of the year, right? So 2023 would be like 20 plus C plus M plus B plus 23.
Next year it would be 20 CMB 24
Yeah.
for like the next one that's coming. And they'll also like put dried herbs and that have been burnt in the doorways and sprinkle some holy water.
Yeah, house blessings. I had no idea this was like, and it sounds like incredibly pagan to me, but anyway, I'm not going to judge it. It just is what it is. Like what you were saying earlier, I find it always very interesting in the story that they say that they've come because they've been following this star of Bethlehem, and you kind of like touched on that earlier, that they were kind of connected with the stars and the sky. I was told the Star of Bethlehem was the North Star growing up, and I don't know if that's actually
Yeah.
true, but that's kind of like what the church had told me growing up, that it was the North Star. But
I remember hearing this too.
But I mean, there was a program that I took with the University of Barcelona a few years ago, which was with magic in the Middle Ages. And part of
I remember you telling me
Yeah.
about this course.
Oh,
Cool.
so cool.
Okay, yeah.
It was really cool. And the coolest part was a part I had no idea about. And it was actually when they touched on the golden age, the Islamic golden age, because this is like really the point where like really what we know of our astrology today really comes from that time. And it comes from
so much of the Renaissance and like the enlightened golden age was because of the Islamic people.
But you have to remember that the Islamic golden age in history happens during the European dark and middle ages.
Oh, I know.
So they were like it's really interesting because they were like really progressive and quite ahead of their time at the time in relation to that.
Our surgical tools, like tools in surgeries today, are still named after like the original names that the Islamic population gave a bunch of surgical implements, which is really, really cool. Oh, and no one talks about it. Yeah, no one talks about it. I'm like, okay, we owe the Islamic world so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because without them, we would not be where we are. We'd still be using leeches to like suck toxins out of our blood.
Word, preach. Oh my God, it's so true. I feel like this is the biggest travesty that we just don't learn enough about this.
No, not at all.
I didn't learn anything about this growing up, and I had to kind of like seek out my own information on some of it.
Like music, art, science, technological advances, like that's all owed to the Islamic population at the time.
Yeah, it's incredible. So yeah, I was always interested. I keep thinking about that and the connection that these guys, obviously these wise men or these magi had to the stars. And I wonder what it meant exactly when they said that they were observing his star rising, because it's very symbolic, right? Especially if you get any glimpse into who these men are supposed to be, it's quite symbolic of many things. Like the star rising is like him coming into the world, a light in the darkness. And it connects back to all of the stuff that we've been talking about in this season in relation to solstice. And I felt like this would also be a good time and a good episode for you to fully let that rant out about Jesus's birthday. Like, if we're going to talk about it, this is the show, right? Like,
I mean, inevitably, we'll touch upon it inevitably, because I think it would be really cool to just do a season purely on biblical lore and like all the stuff related to that.
I'm already making notes for that. I'll tell you right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will probably rant about it then. The like you said in the last episode, it's kind of been proven that he was probably actually more so born in June or something like that. I always thought, just with the fact that there would be baby sheep, it would be in the springtime that he would have been born, because that's just logically what makes sense. This is not the time when there are baby animals in some barn somewhere, like it just... This is not when animals have babies. It's springtime, spring, summer, when animals have babies. Like, flat out. That's just, there's no more to say about it.
Right. Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. It's borrowed from other traditions. And originally, there's a bunch of other pagan traditions that kind of happen at this time.
Yes.
So it is, it is one of Christianity's oldest feast days, and it predates Christmas. It predates the celebration of Christmas, obviously. But there was already a pagan feast of the sun god, which was celebrated in Egypt for the winter solstice on January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And on the previous night, the pagans of Alexandria commemorated the birth of their god Aeon, and supposedly born of the virgin Kore. And remember, Kore is Persephone later. Kore is her in her like innocent stance. They believed that on this night, the waters of the rivers, especially the Nile, acquired miraculous power and even turned into wine. That's an important one.
Quick.
And it's possible that these beliefs prompted the addition of the themes of the birth of Jesus and the miracle of Cana to the Christian's feast. So Cana is when Jesus, at Mary's request, turns a bunch of water into wine.
That's exactly where I was hoping you would go with that. That was exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
As a Christian celebration on January 6th, the feast is first mentioned Clement of Alexandria around the year 215. Mm-hmm. That's the first time that it's like mentioned commemorating the baptism of Jesus on that day. And by the 4th century, the feast in the East kind of acquired this combination of themes of Jesus' birth, his baptism, the miracle of Cana, and the coming of the Magi. But originally, it was celebrated in Egypt as a pagan holiday.
Okay, so this is kind of like part of what I wanted to get to on this, because I think this is why the Magi are interesting to me. They're, in a way, they're like, they're kind of like they stick out like a green thumb in this story, or like a sore thumb in this story. Like
green thumb. They're magical beings.
Yeah.
And they like plants.
Yeah. Exactly. But honestly, they do stick out because they're kind of like not like where the imagery of this whole thing is in a stable and a manger. And I said it earlier, like these guys come in and they're priests, they're kings, they're this, they're that. So when I was looking into the Magi, one of the things that came up was that the word magi itself is like the plural of the Latin word magus. Am I saying that right? Magus, M-A-G-U-S. Is there a more Roman way to say that? You're good with pronunciation, so I'm asking.
I feel like that's fine.
Okay. But what's double interesting is it refers specifically to Persian priests of Zoroastrianism.
Ooh.
Do you know what Zoroastrianism? Zoroastrian.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't
get mad at me for butchering that word. I want to do it justice because I think this is freaking fascinating.
Zoroastrianism, I don't know too much about it. They are small in their numbers, and this is probably, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's because you have to be born into it. You can't convert or anything like that. And it's supposed to, at its core, kind of represent the never-ending battle between good and evil.
Yes.
And so it's like there's this contest between the religion's god and an evil spirit.
Yes.
And they have, like, believers have the freedom to basically make good or bad choices. And yeah, like that's from what I remember, like from university many moons ago. That's very little, but like that's
so another really interesting point of this religion is that it's actually considered one of the world's oldest organized faiths. Mm-hmm. It's an Iranian religion. And exactly what you said, it creates this dualistic cosmology of good versus evil. I'm just going to literally read something that I took from online.
Okay.
It has a dualistic cosmology of good and evil within the framework of a monotheistic onology, which predicts the ultimate conquest of evil by good, like what you just pretty much said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It exalts an uncertain and benevolent deity, wisdom known as Azura Mazda, so the Lord of Wisdom as its supreme being.
Mm-hmm.
What is really, really interesting about this is that if you look into it, like if you just read like quickly the overview of what this religion is, it sounds really familiar. What does it sound like? Like prior to reading this, I didn't know of another religion
Are
that
you
really.
you're thinking that it sounds like the Cathars because they also have a dualistic view, no?
No, 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 absolutely.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
okay, yeah, I think you could say that, but the Cathars were Christian. The Cathars were
I know
Christian.
they were Christian, yeah. So what do you
So what am I
mm,
driving at here? Okay, I'll tell you what I'm driving at
mhm.
here. I read about this tradition and I read about how they bring the three magi into this story. And I think it's really particular, especially when you look at the Bible itself being essentially created, or like we'll say published, by
Mhm.
a pagan Roman who converts on his deathbed to Christianity.
Right.
To me, when I was reading about all of this, I was like, it just sounds like what they did. Knowing what we know from the other episodes about the Romans having no qualms with like praying to somebody else's God to hope that they would get what they would want, it really just feels like what
Yeah.
we know of as Christianity is essentially the
Oh,
framework
but
of this religion. Let's
like I
throw
thought
in.
that that's I basically thought that well, yeah, because didn't basically it helped create all of the Abrahamic traditions.
Yeah, it did. It absolutely
Oh,
did.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
it's
didn't
like,
realize that's where you were driving. I was like,
yeah,
I thought you wanted something more specific. I'm like, well, the
no,
Cathars specifically.
no, no, no. It's very interesting because I don't think that, well, I think a lot of people don't necessarily know about this. So I think it's really interesting because this dualism framework comes from this old Iranian religion. And then we take a story from the Egyptian culture and mythology. And we know the Romans were very invested in Egypt at a certain point, especially in that
Oh,
year,
very much so.
especially in that time.
Yeah.
So we take this how do you say it?
Zoroastrian.
Zoroastrian framework. We take an Egyptian story, throw it in there, and then if Jesus was alive and was like a prominent figure in and around this time, we just like slap his name on it, and we've got ourselves like this repackaged religion,
It's
and it's
rebranded. You
yeah.
know, I've always said that Paul is the greatest marketer of all time. Okay? The Apostle Paul is absolutely the greatest marketer of all time. And there are so many beliefs that, Jesus had his main disciples, his main following, and there's so many beliefs that they had to go underground after Jesus's death, and Paul kind of sought them out. After he had his own epiphany, he sought them out, and they were just like, "No, you cannot join us." And because of that rejection, he like started writing all of these letters and basically said that he had his own like revelation and marketed the religion to be what it is today, or at least the early parts of what it is today.
Yeah. It
So
was just
thanks
a
for
little,
that.
it was a little bit of a, to be, not to be so cliche, but it was a bit of an epiphany for me actually, because I didn't know much about, I still don't know much about it, but I can even see just in the basic framework of this religion, that it's very similar. And like you said, it goes on, they've actually, a lot of people have verified that it goes on to later inform all of these other religions, the religions that we
Mm-hmm.
actually consider today, even including Buddhism, I think was also included in that list.
Really? That's cool. I
Yes.
didn't know that.
Yeah, it goes on to influence other religious and philosophical systems, including the Abrahamic religions, the Gnosticism, Northern
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism, and Greek philosophy.
Cool.
So, yeah. that is something I would love to do a deeper dive on later, because
Yeah, I'd be into that.
for me to find like an origin of something that's been going on and reshaped and redone for so long is so fascinating. But it's just really, it
Yeah.
kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I remember, I think I sent you a message being like, I feel so, I didn't even think it was possible to be more disillusioned than I already am, but like, hot damn.
Yeah, I mean, Zoroastrianism is like you said, one of the oldest organized religions, like possibly around 4,000 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's still around today. Just the numbers are really small.
Well, geez, I guess considering everything that's gone on in the world, that kind of makes sense,
Yeah.
especially if you can't convert into it, if you have to be born into it. It's like a whole
That's I like don't quote me on that. That's what I
thing.
remember hearing like I don't know, over 10 years ago in university, but maybe I'm remembering that incorrectly.
But
I'm
I
pretty
also
sure
think
that
it's
that
really
may be true.
interesting that all of these religions and even philosophies at this point that it's informed. I think it's very interesting that people love to gravitate towards, or they feel very connected to the concept of good and versus evil. And I'm not saying it's not real. I feel like, especially in a way, I feel like sometimes we're living in a time where we're being faced with that feeling on a daily level with what's happening in the world right now. And maybe that's why that's such an attractive theology as to the ultimate form of the universe, because like it's, I've always questioned whether dualism was actually like a real thing. So that's kind of like where my thinking comes in and around that, because obviously there are other faiths that don't necessarily believe in that dualism.
I
But
think that it's just very much humans are inherently flawed. And that means that
understatement of a lifetime.
innately, huh?
Understatement of a lifetime.
Yeah. Inherently, there are humans and actions that are good and actions that are bad. And it's a really simplistic way of looking at the world. But sometimes when you have something bad to focus on, like it's also a unifying thing to then
Mm-hmm.
be on the good side and fight against it. And this
Mm-hmm.
is something that we've seen time and time again. It's stories that resonate really heavily with us, often follow this guidelines like I love the Lord of the Rings, so do you. But like that's very much a story of good and evil and like
Absolutely.
of banding together to fight evil as well, right?
Yeah, I think there's something about it too that gives like a clear, like usually in these types of stories, whether they're biblical stories or they're, fantasy stories that we love, it seems so obvious. It seems so obvious what is good, and it seems so obvious what is bad. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting because when you put it into real world context, it's way more like complex than that. It's much harder
So
for
much more.
people.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, especially, before this, we were talking about everything that's happening right now, um, in the world and in the East and what's going on. And it's like, so there are so many people that it seems very clear are kind of like sitting on the quote unquote wrong side of history. But it's like, do they see it that way? Maybe not,
Probably not, right?
because
Probably
whatever their
not.
information is that they're receiving, they may not understand it to be that way. So I think that that's always really, really interesting when it comes into real world scenarios with people, because we do believe in this dualism, but then like the nuances of that are like very complex in the real world scale of things. But I've always been really interested in that concept anyway. So I was really
Mm-hmm.
happy to find a connection to like the early concept of that.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And also I think it's like
Absolutely.
it's telling that the magi are there. Maybe the magi represent something bigger than we're understanding, because they're coming from the east. They are
Mm-hmm.
the priests of this religion, and they are actually giving gifts to Jesus. And then they decide, instead of going back to Herod, they decide to leave and return. It's almost like they have been converted in the process of
Yes.
seeing Jesus. And so I don't think that it's necessarily it's not telling in an obvious way, but it's telling of like what the messaging was behind that. Putting them in the story is symbolic
Mm-hmm.
of something bigger. You know what I mean? Of a
Yeah.
shift
Yeah.
in cultural understanding and reference that maybe is kind of lost on us now, and really like whittles down to a cake with a little baby inside of it. But it was
Yeah.
it could actually have some meaning connected to it that's quite a lot more significant than that.
I think that that's probably very true. And it's, subliminal messaging is a thing. It always has been. I think that's a way to,
Right.
yeah, get the population to better grasp and understand this news story. And let's not forget that this took a long time, because then there was a period where Christians were persecuted for this belief system afterwards,
Absolutely.
right? And so it wasn't like it happened overnight. But
No,
this
yeah.
story and this doctrine kind of, like you said, I think you're right. It does represent this shift. And so the people who did believe in it, like, firmly held on to this story moving forward.
Yeah. I don't know. Did you see that video I sent you? Did you watch it?
Which one?
I sent
I
you.
haven't watched anything yet.
You have to watch that video I sent you, because I think more
Okay.
than once on this podcast, I've like gone on this rant about like we need a timeline of history, and you're like, yeah, but it's super long. It would take for fucking ever. Somebody did it and made it really funny. And I only I only sent you one part of it because it's long, but obviously because it's the history of time.
Yeah, history of time. There are people on YouTube that like break it down in a really hilarious way.
It might be that. It might actually be that.
Yeah.
What I sent you was just like a clip of that. But I'm gonna post that on our social medias because
bravo to whoever did it.
Brilliantly done. It was so good. I got so excited watching it. I was like, yes, this is what I've been talking about forever. You know.
I know, it's just difficult. Like, it's really easy to, not easy, it is really difficult to just like create a timeline like that. But then to go into the nuances of everything, you have to stop.
No,
you have to stop and actually break it down.
They don't really nuance a lot because it's kind of hard to do, actually, especially when we don't have a lot. We don't always have the reference material to get into nuance. Like,
no, you just hit the highlights.
I think we don't necessarily understand that a lot of these like higher level I would say like academic learnings in relation to history, archaeology, science, a lot of it's speculative. Like with science, they've created a process to try and prove their speculations, but I mean ultimately we're all just taking very educated guesses.
Pretty much. And there have been times where something was proven in science and then later it's proven wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just thought that this whole story related to the magi, that was kind of like the little rabbit hole that I went under. I also thought it was really funny. This is a completely unrelated, but Balthazar is one of the three wise men. But where do you know the name Balthazar from?
Well, as a demon, but I think the Balthazar as a demon, isn't it spelled with a Z?
Well, I looked up the spelling of Balthazar this way. It was also spelled with a Z. But
oh, really? I looked at it and spelled with an S.
Even more so, it's one of the main characters in Charmed. Which I'm like, how do we get here? Like, I'm constantly just blown away by like how we get from that to this. You know what I mean? Like, humans are crazy.
Oh, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Was Balthazar a demon? Now I'm just like, is he a demon? No, Balthazar is just...
I know him as a demon from Charmed. I don't know if he was a demon in any other situation, but...
Maybe that's just where I have that in my mind. Because I'm like, was Balthazar actually a demon now? I don't remember.
You know me. I watch every single, like, fantasy, esoteric-y show under the sun, and I love them, but I also think they've really detrimented us in terms of like they use a lot of stuff that's just like it's just wildly inaccurate. Don't take TV shows as as fact, people. If you're seeing stuff
No,
about
don't do
TV
that.
shows about demons and stuff, it's probably not accurate. And I know you're like, what do you mean accurate? It's not real. But like, I mean, there is some level of accuracy in this somewhere. Speculative.
Then this is how
accuracy.
folk tales evolve.
Yeah. This is the cluster F of a folktale, guys.
That's funny.
That's why they're so fun to kind of like dive into, right?
Yeah. Well, and so I guess I'm going to go into a little bit more of a folk tradition around Epiphany, but on a like in a specific part of the world. So I had mentioned, Eastern churches all kind of seem to have a blessing or water ritual associated with Epiphany. A lot of countries in Central Europe and stuff, they do have that house blessing that we were talking about earlier. In France, you call it King's Day. In Portugal, we have King's Cake, so I assume that we also call it King's Day. I should really look into that a little bit more. I never made that
King's
connection
Day
until
in New Orleans as well, by the way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
In Spanish-speaking country, the three kings receive wish letters from children and magically bring them gifts before Epiphany, kind of similar to Santa Claus. So that's something that happens in a few Spanish-speaking countries. And children prepare like drinks and cookies for them and little treats, very much like children in North America do for Santa Claus. So like there are all these folk customs surrounding Epiphany that are less religious, let's say. And similar customs exist in Italy around a woman called La Befana. And La Befana is represented by an old woman riding a broomstick through the air, delivering sweets and candies to good kids and garlic, coal, and onions to the rascals.
Wow, we've heard this.
So,
wow, so interesting, eh?
Yeah. And the origins of it's so cool. The origins of La Befana can be traced back to the 10th to 9th century BCE.
Okay, way back.
Okay. Way back there. At that time, people had rituals celebrating the end of the year's harvest and the beginning of a new season in the agricultural calendar. And at this time, Befana was more like a Mother Nature character. And that, like the 12th night after Christmas, would go from door to door to leave seeds and buds to be planted during the new year. Very agriculturally based. Nice. And then the ancient Romans kind of inherited these rituals to celebrate the 12 days after the winter solstice and the Sol Invictus.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Sol Invictus. And remember, the Sol Invictus is kind of like them celebrating their sun god, the unconquered sun, at the end of their calendar year. So they would celebrate this rebirth of nature at this time. And at this time, Romans then believed that unknown female figures would fly over these cultivated fields to ensure excellent results for future crops. And then again, like this is where we start hearing that La Befana flies. So like she starts off as just like this agricultural goddess or like mythical figure of sorts and moves into this being that actually flies, that celebrates the end of the calendar year. So La Befana is an old and ugly woman. And if you actually enter the word Befana into Google Translate, any guesses as to what you get? What's the word that you get?
Ugly.
Hag.
Hag. Okay. Oh, yeah. It's a witch.
Yeah.
It's a witch, y'all.
Yeah. Yep. She's got a really large nose. She has rotting and crooked teeth. She's got warts and moles on her face. One of her symbols is a broom. She uses the broom to sweep up all of the past of the year away and prepare and cleans the space for the new, to welcome the new. And so the reason that she's ugly is because she represents the end of the year.
She's the crone. And finally we get a story about the crone. All right.
Yeah. Woo-hoo. Yeah. And even though she looks really grim, she's always smiling. Okay. She wears a little old black shawl. She's covered in a layer of soot because she enters children's homes through, any guesses?
The chimney.
Yeah.
Chimney.
She enters homes through the chimney. And there is a custom in Tuscany where they burn little Befana dolls, and the remaining coal will be placed in children's socks along with candies as a reminder of the past year. So they get treats, but they also get this piece of coal to kind of remember what has happened in the past.
Interesting.
So she goes around carrying a big hamper full of candies and gifts for children. And children hang their stockings on the mantle of their fireplace, or they'll put shoes out the window if they don't have that, so Befana can fill them with presents.
I'm so
Now,
confused. I'm like, what season are we in right now? Because this feels like it belongs in our October season. Almost, doesn't it?
It's kind of, but a lot of the things that she's doing also sounds like a Santa figure.
Yeah.
She 100% sounds like a Santa figure.
Absolutely.
And there are actually 2 Christian legends associated with Befana. Yeah. So she did all this stuff beforehand, and then Christianity comes in, and they're like, hey, we can take some of this on.
Because those Romans were onto something. If we just like piecemeal everything, it'll be fine.
It'll be good. So there's 2 Christian legends associated with Befana. One, and probably the most popular, is that the 3 wise men, or magi, stopped at Befana's hut on their way to honor the Son of God. And they told her they were following a comet in the sky. And they asked for more information. And she was pretty uninvolved in the matter. And she was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. But if you want a place to stay tonight, sure, you can stay here. So she offers them shelter. And she's considered like the best housekeeper in the village, and she has the warmest house.
Nice.
And the magi, after spending the night there, invite her to join them on their journey to visit baby Jesus, but she declines because she's really busy with household chores. Mm-hmm. And after they leave, she begins to regret her decision, and she runs out in the middle of the night to look for them and to look for the baby Jesus, and she can't find them. So to make sure she's giving presents to the right baby, she just decides to leave something for every child. Aww. And from then on, she spends the night of January 5th bringing presents to all of the children in Italy.
And that's how an Italian folk story got converted to Christianity.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh and my gosh, that's so wild.
The second legend actually says that she was just an ordinary woman with a son, but her son sadly passed away, and she was left full of pain and sorrow. But she hears about this birth of Jesus and decides to go and visit and honors him by bringing baby clothes as a gift. And Jesus, noticing the pain of her loss, gives her the gift in return, where she's to be the mother of all of the babies in Italy.
Aww.
And so that's why she goes around. Yeah, she goes around delivering these gifts and everything. So today, Befana is still a cherished holiday, kind of like a second Christmas. And she was originally more important than Santa.
You know what? Like, this kind of tracks. That sounds like one of the only stories that's probably written by a woman, because it's the only story where somebody thought to bring Jesus clothes.
I know.
Only a mom would think, hey, like, Mary and Joseph are in a manger. Like, maybe he needs something to wear. That's amazing.
Yeah, and so to celebrate today, like, besides all the candies that kids can kind of find in their stockings above the chimneys, in certain areas they'll prepare what are they called? Befanini cookies, or nece, which are crepes made with chestnut flour and filled with fresh ricotta. And in the 80s, there was like a really small municipality in the province of Massa Carrara in northern Tuscany, where on the night of Epiphany's Eve, small groups of people would dress up like Befana and visit every family in town and offer candies to children and get warm beverages. And now it's just much more of a contemporary event. So people take to the streets, and there's music and entertainment in this village.
Is this where we get Christmas sugar cookies from? Because I just did like a quick Google search for the
Befanini.
And they're probably like the star-shaped sugar cookies.
Yeah. So it very well could be.
Oh my gosh. Oh, next time you come here for Christmas, let's go to Italy. That sounds fun.
Yeah, I would love to do that. That sounds great.
Super, super fun. Tuscany's really not so far.
Kayla and I spent Christmas in the south of Italy, in Lecce one year. and that was really, really fun. And they have, in the South, they have these cakes made of, or not made of fish. They have these cakes that are made to look like fish, and like,
Oh, yes.
um,
It's a very Catholic
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah,
Like that classic fish shape. Like,
the classic fish shape. Yeah, and they have a bunch of like almond cookies or classics, and they had so many delicious sweets down there. It was
Yum,
really,
yum,
really nice.
yum, yum,
Yeah.
yum, yum. Also, just a side note for anybody that's super gluten intolerant listening to this, Italy is apparently one of the best countries in Europe, if not the world, for like gluten intolerance, like people traveling
Oh,
with
because
gluten
so many
intolerance.
things are made of almond flour. So many delicious
Yes.
sweets are made of almond flour. And they have a bunch of specific gluten-free grocery stores where you can go and get bread and pasta and stuff like that. That is like, you go in there and everything is gluten-free. It's amazing.
It's amazing. I saw this online and I was like, is it true? And then like so this summer Michael and I just did a little quick jet across the border while we were in the Alps.
Yeah.
Just for like a day trip, and immediately I found so much because I can't really eat wheat. It's not that I can't eat gluten, but I can't eat wheat. And I found so many gluten-free options which are usually not made with wheat. And
Yeah.
it was all true, and I was really excited and blown away by that. So that's just a side note. If you would like to go to Italy at some point and celebrate this holiday and you're gluten intolerant, just know that you can.
Well, then you'd like the Christmas cookies in leche, the fish
Mm.
made of marzipan. It's made of marzipan. It's delicious.
Oh, yum yum! I like marzipan.
Yeah.
Yum, yum,
Yeah. So
yum.
good.
Anyways, I like that we ended this whole story on cookies. We brought
Yeah,
it
it's a
back to
good.
food. We brought it back to food. Like this is the modern
But
age.
this is just it. I think that's always been like with any celebration throughout time, food is just a very uniting thing. You
Absolutely.
gather around food.
Food
Kitchen
and story
parties.
and food and stories kind of come hand in hand, especially around celebrations like this.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's so interesting. On one hand, I feel like it really like when we're going back to like the level of like the king's cake, it feels like it's kind of like the story has been diluted and diluted and diluted, and now it's
Yeah.
back to a cake. But actually, in a way, the opposite could be true. You can take it from the cake and kind of like find out all of this information.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. I really enjoyed researching this because I felt like in this series we've covered a lot of other topics, but I don't think we wanted to cover like the classical Christmas or the classical Christian Christmas because like kind of everybody knows
No.
it. But this is something that's kind
Yeah.
of connected to that has all of these other ties to other things, which is really, really interesting and neat.
Yeah, and it's one that's just less celebrated, at least in the West.
And you
And like,
might
well,
think you
North
know
America.
all the stories, but maybe not.
You don't. You
Yeah.
don't. And we didn't even touch on Herod.
Well, like you said, he's a dude, and we've talked about him briefly in the witch series we did in October, but I think like you
Mm-hmm.
said, we just like need to do like a whole like biblical. I love the
Yeah.
idea of a biblical lore because that's really what it is at this point. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so we are going to go on hiatus for a couple of weeks
Oh
as
yes.
we celebrate the holidays. We'll be back in January.
Yes.
But enjoy whatever you decide to celebrate or not celebrate. If it's just a day off for you, enjoy it. If it's just gathering with friends and family and eating delicious food with no other connotation, enjoy it. If you're doing something religious, enjoy it. Just enjoy it.
Yeah, and maybe this series has kind of given you some insight into a whole bunch of different holidays, celebrations, ideologies around the holidays, the Christmas season. And maybe, you found something in here you liked. So here's a new opportunity to maybe incorporate something new this year or not. Do as you will. But we're going to go enjoy our holidays. I know that I'll be incorporating some stuff from what we've talked
Yeah, I'm
about
going to
in
make
this
some sugar
series.
cookies or something, maybe some marzipan fish cakes.
I'm all about that. I'm all about those candles, like everything related to the candles, and like how am I going to do stuff with candles
Yeah.
this year?
Yeah.
But yeah, like Mel said, we're going to go away for a little while. We'll be back in the new year with a whole new season. We're not going to tell you what it is yet. but it's a good one. We're both really excited about it.
Yeah.
So with that, wishing you a phenomenal holiday season, whatever you celebrate. Hope you're with people that fill you up and make you feel happy. And we hope you have a wonderful, warm, cheery time of year.
And we'll see you next time.
See you in the new year, guys.